Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Living Now, which is our new name for the series. I'm Vivian Hermes, and I'm here with my co facilitator, Frank Baird. Welcome, Frank.
Hi, Vivian. Hi, everybody.
Hi. And today we're going to continue with the topic for the month of New Year, New You, with a focus on zooming in and zooming out with Frank. I'll turn it over to you, Frank.
So, welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about Zooming, which, if you have dogs, dogs get the Zoomies. I wish I got the Zoomies. I wish like I had that kind of energy. But zooming in and zooming out is about shifting the focus of attention. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, and that's what we're going to practice. So here's the thing about attention. Whatever you're paying attention to in the present moment is going to be your experience in the present moment. So you may
Mhm.
have narrow focus of attention or you may have a wide focus of attention, but what you're paying attention to is your experience. And so this notion of moving your attention around, zooming it in, zooming it out, moving it to the left, moving it to the right, we're going to start a dance craze, is it does a couple of things. One, it puts you more in charge of your attention rather than attention just going wherever it goes, whatever catches attention. It gives you more influence over your attention. And I think of it as like going to the gym and lifting weights. Each iteration of moving your attention from one place to another increases the strength in moving your attention one way or another. So, to just sort of illustrate whatever you're paying attention to in the present moment is going to be your experience in the present moment, let's take a look at this. So, some of you may remember that I mentioned we're fostering dogs, and the dog we're fostering now had 5 puppies, and here they are. And this is 3 of them, and here are the other two, and they're nonstop cute. So I would just suggest that if you're feeling stressed out about anything, get a puppy and look at the puppy, or get a whole handful of puppies because the more, the better. Right? So you can look at all the puppies. You can look at one puppy. So anyway, that's the puppy share. Let's talk about focusing and refocusing attention. So, different people use different language for these things, but I think of this. So, if I'm shifting attention away from something, often what people describe is that you're distracting yourself, right? So, let's say there's some anxious thinking going on. It's got my attention. I recognize that I don't need to be paying attention to this anxious thinking, and I may or may not know how to disengage my attention. But often people will say something like, distract yourself from the anxiety or the anxious thoughts. I prefer shifting attention toward and focusing on something. So I use the language of, excuse me, I use the language of disengaging and redirecting attention. In part, I like that because distraction is a word that's always in relation to the thing you're trying to get away from. Whereas shifting attention toward or focusing on, you can forget about what you were trying to get away from and you're focusing on the thing that you're moving toward now. So again, these words may be more or less important to you, but that's how I think of it. So one way of shifting attention, moving it, is move it away from or move it toward. Now, another way of shifting attention is narrowing focus or widening focus. So I like to think of this example. If let's say I'm afraid of spiders, and you may have seen this done as like a special effect in a movie, right? So if I've got a close, narrow focus on the face of a spider, even if it's one of those cute-ish ones, it's a big image of a spider, and if I don't like spiders, that's going to be particularly upsetting. But if I move the focus back a bit in film, for example, they talk about an extreme close-up, then a close-up, then, a two-shot, then a wide shot. These are ways of saying that the camera is moving back,
Mm.
and what you're seeing in your line of sight is more and more. So the narrow focus would be on the face of this spider. I back up a little bit, now I see the whole spider, still a little upsetting. I move back a little more, and what I see is, say, the grass in the backyard and the spider somewhere in the grass. I can still see the spider. So it's still upsetting if I'm afraid of spiders, but the spider is now smaller. And if I continue to move back, so let's say I move back and my view is now of the entire backyard, and it doesn't matter whether it's a small yard or a big yard, the yard is bigger than the spider, and I might not even see the spider now. And if I backed up even more, let's say now I've got the house, like one of those New Jersey drone views, a drone flying over the house. So I see the house and the yard. There's no way I can see a spider in there. And then that thing they do in the movies where now the camera widens and you see the whole community, widens more, you see the whole country, widens more, you see the whole planet. So this changes the perspective. And it's valuable to be able to do that because sometimes, let's say there's a lot going on around you and it's clamoring for your attention, and you don't need to be paying attention to it. Being able to narrow your focus is going to be really helpful. Or if you notice that you have a narrow focus of attention and it's on something like a spider's face or anxious thinking, then it can help to really widen the focus of attention. Well, you can do two things. One, you can take that narrow focus and disengage and move it to something else. So instead of the anxious thinking, maybe I'll go pet the puppy. Um, or what I can do instead of focusing on the anxious thinking, I can widen the focus of attention so that um, there's a different context. So, one of the ways there can be a different context is this moment of suffering in my life right now, this thing that's happening. Let's say it sucks. And if I widen the focus of attention and I think, say, about the entirety of my life, that puts this in a slightly different perspective. For me, that puts it in a perspective of mostly my life has been pretty good. It's got its moments because every life does, but right, this wider context makes it less difficult for me to be with the suffering that's happening right now because this wider focus says this isn't the whole picture. This is also something that is sometimes encouraged when we're working with physical discomfort or pain. That what you might notice is your attention gets focused on this is always a tricky thing. We think our attention is focused on the discomfort. Mostly our attention is focused on the thoughts and the feelings about the discomfort. So, moving your attention, you can narrow the focus so that the thoughts and the feelings about the discomfort aren't the focus of attention, but instead the sensations are. So, it's really fascinating when sensations become sensations. They have particular qualities rather than, "ow, this hurts." It still hurts, and that's not the primary focus of attention. So you can narrow it or you can widen it and bring attention to like my entire body because in my entire body, let's say this particular area of discomfort is limited. It's my knee or it's my ankle or it's my back. And I might notice that things like my arms feel fine ish or my head feels okay ish. So these are some of the benefits of shifting attention and putting attention where you want it to be or where you need it to be and having the degree of close up or wide shot um, that is really beneficial in that moment. So, one of the things I think is always helpful is, do I need to pay attention to, say, a thought that's happening or an emotion that's happening? And I use a sort of a thought tree as a decision tree. So, how to determine whether you need to pay attention to something or not. Um, like just because it's in focus doesn't mean I need to be paying attention to it. So, I'll ask myself a question like, where is this happening? So, for example, so much of the stuff that bothers me is happening in my head. It's happening as a thought or it's happening as emotion. Those two partner up regularly. It's like this thought brings that emotion, or that emotion brings this flurry of thoughts. So let's say it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and here are some thoughts that are inviting or requiring or producing rage or anxiety. Lots of people are experiencing both of those regularly, especially these days. So, where is it happening? It's happening as thoughts. Is it happening now? It's happening as thoughts. But the thing that the thoughts are pointing to, like actions or stories, they're only happening in the story, in the thinking. So one of the things then I might do is, so kind of right, it's kind of happening now. The thinking is happening now, but the events that the thinking is or are about aren't. So then next question, is there anything I need or can do with or about this? That one's a really, really challenging one because there's a lot of stuff that I can be anxious about or that I can be angry about that I can't do anything about. And so what I might notice is I'm busy being angry and I can't do anything about it. So really I would benefit from disengaging my attention and either redirecting it or widening it because that anger isn't serving me. It's only um, that anxiety, that anger, it's only upsetting me and then most likely people around me because we go around sharing our emotional states with other people. So now let's say there is something happening. It is happening now, and it's not just a thought. Like, where is it happening in the world? Is it happening? Well, I want to say not in the world. It's happening physically in front of me. Is it happening now? Yes. Is there anything I need or can do with that or about that? Let's say the answer is yes. Then here's a question we often don't like to ask ourselves. Am I going to do that thing? So I've gone through this thought process. I figured out there is something I can do. Am I going to do it? If the answer is yes, then the encouragement is stay focused on it and do it. Here's the tricky thing though. If the answer is no, then the recommendation is disengage and redirect attention. There is no benefit to focusing on it. Let me back up on that a little bit. Like sometimes it's entertaining. Um, I used to like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Walking Dead series and its 10 billion spinoffs. I used to really, really like that. And it's an intense show. And then certain things started happening in the world that were intense. And I went, I can't watch the show anymore because I've got this kind of drama in life. It's not entertaining anymore. But let's say I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I've got some anxious thinking going on. I might want to hang out with it. I might want to spend some time with it. Um, Mostly I'd rather not because I'd rather be asleep. Um, and I have to say, you'll want to be careful about thinking you need to pay attention to it because anxiety is really good at that. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. It says, think about this. I might mistakenly believe I'm figuring something out when really I'm just ruminating. So being careful, and if the answer is no, disengage and redirect. See if I can talk at all. Redirect attention. So let's do a practice. And with this practice, I'm going to show something on the screen. Some of you were here recently when we used an application and we had some visuals and some sounds going on. This is a little different. I'll tell you a little bit about it as it comes up. But to practice, get comfortable. You can do this practice in stillness or slow, deliberate movement. Eyes can be open or closed. Well, actually, they should be open for this particular practice because I'm going to have you looking at some things and narrowing and widening focus. And listen to my voice. I'll be providing some instructions. As best you can, establish a friendly, gentle attitude toward whatever is happening, including you, the being that's experiencing whatever's happening. Notice what's happening and stop if you need to. So, with that said, let's practice. I usually like to start a practice by setting the intention to practice. It's kind of announcing to my body and my mind, this is what I'm going to do. And it's kind of a reminder to do it instead of like, oh, taking a nap. So I'm going to practice now. And then I might bring attention to my body and notice what it feels like to be in this body right here, right now. And if I can, I might let go of any tension or tightness that's happening in the body right now. That tension or tightness might not be needed during this practice. It might be left over from something earlier in the day or starting up in anticipation of something later in the day. But for now, just for the duration of this practice, if it doesn't need to be there, and you can, let go of as much of it as you can. And then, as part of settling in, settling down, I like to bring attention to breathing. So, this is narrowing the focus of attention to the felt sense, the felt experience of breathing, and just feeling it happen. And with this narrow focus of attention, if you notice it wanders off or gets lost or it got pulled away, when you notice, gently bring it back to breathing, using breathing as an attention anchor or as a place to reset the intention to pay attention. Focusing on breathing can help the body settle, help the mind settle. And now, if you're on a screen, I realize some of you may be on your phone, so you may not be able to see the imagery I'm about to show you. If you can't see it, it's an aquarium. And so, what I invite you to do is to start with, have a wide view of the aquarium as best you can, just sort of like not looking at anything in particular, just kind of looking in the direction and just letting the fullness of this aquarium on your screen, let it be there. And sometimes you might notice that attention gets drawn in. It narrows, it focuses on something in particular, maybe a fish that's moving by, maybe a flash of color. It's easy to happen when things are moving. So for now, if you can, try to keep your gaze wide. So if you notice it goes to, say, one of those orange fish, and if you can, widen the focus to include the whole aquarium. Noticing where attention is now. And now, for a little while, on purpose, pick a fish and follow that fish around the aquarium. If the fish you're following disappears from your line of sight, you might notice what happens to your attention. Does it fuzz out? Does it go wide? Does it look for another fish? Or does it stay lingering in that spot where the fish disappeared, waiting for it to return? Just noticing what happens when your attention is focused on a single fish. noticing where attention is now. And you might notice, are you following the same fish? Or did another fish catch your eye? And now, for a little while, shift this narrow focus of attention to some object on the screen. So, not the entire aquarium, but pick the corner of a rock or that plant in the middle. Pick some object that isn't particularly moving and anchor your attention to that for a little while. And if attention wanders off, if, for example, a fish passes by and you start to follow the fish, remember to bring attention back to this fixed, narrow focus of attention somewhere on the screen, somewhere specific. Remembering to pay attention. And for now, just noticing. Maybe it's easy to establish and maintain a narrow focus of attention. Maybe it's not. And for now, focusing on a specific location that isn't moving. And now shift attention on purpose again and let it go to any one of these three kinds of locations we've been exploring. Either a wide view of the aquarium, or pick a fish to follow, or anchor your attention to some place within the aquarium. And remember to focus your attention wherever it's focused, being intentional about the focus of attention. And now, for a little while in our practice, you might play around with what is sometimes called open awareness. So look at this image of the aquarium and let attention go wherever it goes. And see if you can follow along, keeping track of your attention. If there was a voiceover narrator, it might be saying something like, now here, now here, now here. And it's entirely possible, maybe even likely, that you'll forget to pay attention on purpose. And so attention will be going wherever it's going, but it won't be aware of it necessarily. If that happens and you remember that you're in practice, renew the effort to let attention go wherever it goes and keeping track of it. Notice where attention is now. Now, just for fun, pick two fish to focus on. Try to keep attention focused on these two fish. And if one disappears, notice what happens to attention. And now for the last part of our practice, just look at the screen. Just look at the aquarium. So for now, don't meditate. Don't do anything in particular, except keep an eye on the aquarium. If you'd like to play a little attention ping pong, you might right now narrow the focus of attention to some inanimate object in the aquarium. So picking a spot, narrowing the focus of attention, and holding it there just for a little bit. Feeling what it's like to have your attention focused and held. And now zoom out to a wide shot of the entire aquarium and feel what it's like to have the entire aquarium as the focus of attention. And now zoom in on the fish of your choice and follow this fish around the aquarium for a little bit. And finally, zoom out, widen the focus of attention so that you're looking at the entire aquarium. And as we conclude our practice for tonight, if you'd like, you might express some gratitude to yourself for engaging in this practice or for the fish for being very beautiful and entertaining. And so, shifting from practice, you might stretch, wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, shrug your shoulders, yawn. Thank you for your practice. We now have some time for comments, questions, answers, explorations. Just type your comment or question into the chat.
I do have one already, and it's that it's amazing how the mental chatter stopped with the practice. They're gonna look for something similar on YouTube. Well, this will be part of the recording, right, Frank? Yeah.
Yes.
I have another comment. Oh, go ahead. Oh, it says, enjoyed the visual practice today. First time for that. Found it more difficult to focus on the non moving objects than on the moving object. Is there a reason? Oh, this isn't part of the question. On the moving fish, sorry. So, is there a reason why that would be the case? It's just more novel because it's unpredictable or something?
Yeah. I think it has to do with. So I may be a bit inaccurate about this, but apparently these days we don't have to know things; we just have to have opinions. So here's my opinion. Right, the eyes are always moving a little bit, and they need to do that in order to see things. Right, so it's like the eye moves a little bit so that things that are stationary or inanimate can be seen, but also like looking at the aquarium, the fish are much more interesting. Right, it's also one of those things where like movement is interesting or novel, or if you think about
That's where I was
danger,
thinking.
mostly you don't have to worry about the rock that isn't
Right.
moving, but other things that are moving. um, and I think like I could for me, the easiest was this wide view of the aquarium with an occasional follow a fish and then widen the view again. but I also have that challenge, which is when I try to anchor my attention on an inanimate object in that scene, it's too hard because the fish come by, and if nothing else, they obscure your view for a moment, or if they're just so much more colorful
Mhm.
and interesting. Um, but so that's really nice, right? So if you notice, oh yeah, this is what's happening. My attention just goes because something flashy went by. You know that thing where everybody goes, "Oh, squirrel," uh, sort of like that's where my attention went. Here it was, "Ooh, fish." Um, but noticing, like you can go around. One place to do this is like if you're like in a mall or shopping place where there's lots of people moving around, it is like have this wide view of the environment and then narrow it and like focus on a person or something, or focus like on a storefront as people are walking in and out, and just notice what it's like to on purpose move your attention around like this. And one of the things you'll discover are what kinds of things are the
Mhm.
easiest to focus on and what kinds of things are harder to focus on.
Someone agrees. Interesting and totally makes sense, Frank. The other thing I was thinking as you were speaking, because when I've done like very intensive practice and the mind really slows down, you can actually, if you think of the thoughts that are going through your mind like a waterfall, you kind of slow it down when you're in extended practice because really there's not much novelty, and then I start noticing how much my mind is the thoughts that are coming up are assessing for danger. Like it's kind of wild. That and so that's where I thought you were going to go with that. Is that the novelty is because there's that underlying um, mechanism to scan for anything that would be a threat.
Yeah, yeah. And something moving is going to be more of a threat if it's a threat than something that isn't.
Somebody writes, interesting how zooming out, I felt context of existence expanding, while zooming in, I felt more intimacy with the object of focus, which is kind of obvious, I suppose. I guess it's the relational connections or subjective connection to an object versus space scope of focus I'm referring to. But again, that's kind of obvious, I suppose. I don't know if it's that obvious.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things where I go like, "Oh, I just had this experience," which makes it obvious, but before that,
Yeah.
it wasn't obvious.
Yeah, but that is definitely one of the many things that can happen. The other thing that I was doing when you were practicing, when I wasn't having technical difficulties, was uh, who's looking. So this is zoom in, zoom out. But then there's also the option to practice with who's seeing, and you kind of stand out and see the observer. So that's just like extra credit if you want to work with that.
Well, and we'll add that. We'll do that in a
I
future
think it would even
class.
help with, now that like we're talking about it, with anxiety. Because one of the things with anxiety is that you're very much in here. What would it be like to observe it as a witness?
Observe. Yeah, yeah. The other thing I think about in terms of zooming in and zooming out is another interesting practice is focusing on space. Right, so not outer space, so that's always really fun too. A funny story, when I was a kid, I forget how old I was when Star Trek came out, and I misunderstood what Captain Kirk was saying in the opening titles. I thought he was saying the star-shaped Enterprise, and so when I was a kid, I'd look up at the stars trying to see if they looked like the Enterprise. So but space, right? So you sort of pick, like an object that's some distance away, and then you can do this in a variety of ways, but you focus on the object, and then you try to focus on the space between you and the object, and that's a fascinating practice also. But then along with that, right, it's you, space, it's the space, and then it's the observer of the space. We're gonna Our next practice will be like a David Lynch film.
I That would be so cool. An homage to David Lynch.
It wouldn't be relaxing, but it would be interesting.
Um, Somebody writes, I felt anxiety when my fish disappeared for a while. What should I focus on?
What can I focus on? Yeah, yeah. So an interesting thing, right, to notice, because, like, sometimes, like, I get to a place where, because I've looked at that aquarium a lot, um, I get to a place where I sorta hold my attention in the space where it disappeared, and then sometimes it kind of reappears somewhere close, and then sometimes it's, like, out of the left side of the screen, right? I'm looking over upper right, and it, like, appears somewhere else, um, but that can be really interesting to notice the activity of the mind. I'm trying to stay focused on it, it's out of sight, what do I do? And again, that's a great place to explore. What does it feel like? And then what do you do? And then exploring that and going, is that okay to just do that thing? Because often it is. Or would I like to do that differently? Depending.
One person commented that they watched the fish on Roku screensaver. That's brilliant. It reminded me that if, and we're not, what do you call it, sponsored by Samsung, but if you happen to have a Samsung smart TV, they have distinct channels. And I'm remembering that I actually always have Ocean Vibe, is what it's called. It's a channel dedicated, and you see all sorts of manatees swimming deeply, sharks and whales swimming, and fish. It's and octopus sometimes. It's just an amazing channel to have in the background. Um, but yeah, that's one of the Ocean Vibe is the name of the channel.
I remember when I went for a root canal, it was in this, I guess they call him a dental surgeon. And there was a really nice aesthetic to the place, which is it was really spacious, calming colors, and they had these giant screen TVs that were showing, like, underwater scenes like that. Right, so that really is, okay, the focus of my attention is on the elegant eel that's swimming around in the water, or, the dolphin, instead of the guy who's coming to work on me, which is a lot less pleasant.
And then somebody writes, when I had to watch two fish, it was really a challenge to keep track of them.
Yeah, so noticing what you do, like, for me, to keep track of 2 fish, really what I end up doing is widening my view so that I'm looking at the whole aquarium. So it's almost like catching things in your peripheral vision, right? Or, there's this sort of, like, way you just kinda stare, but you're holding everything in sight. Or I don't know if you remember, I forget if it was the '80s or the '90s. It was back in the 1900s. There was this phase where there were these posters that were really popular. They were like these abstract patterns, and if you looked at them just right, which always felt like cross your eyes just a little bit, like a 3D image would appear. So I always feel like do that, and you can, like, be aware and notice multiple things at a time, and then maybe something 3D will appear in the universe. And don e e endo endodon it's got too many syllables. Endodontist, yes. So, thank you all for being here. We have to go for now. Come back next week. Bring all your anxiety, but keep it in a small box so that it's contained. And bring your friends and their anxiety too. Like, we're ready to take it on. Um,
Wait, Frank, are you going to include the puppy video in this video?
Yeah,
Good. Okay, so the puppies will also be in the recording.
and maybe I'll just bring them each week until they're adopted.
That would be so cool. They are so adorable. Seriously.
I have to tell you, right, focus of attention. You go in, they're all happy to see you, and you just put your hands in there, and they're all really, really soft, and they have these, they're starting to get, the ability to bite, and
Oh,
their teeth are in, but they'll, like, lick your fingers and, like, chomp on them, and
oh,
it's just too cute.
that's so
All right.
adorable.
So I think I'll go visit them now
Yeah,
and see you all next week. Thank you.
thanks all.